So there was a woman that approached, who is that? Hold on. Yeah. Okay. So this next story is really interesting. So there was a woman that approached Jamie Harrison at an event that he had in South Carolina. Now, Jamie Harrison, he's part of the DNC, he's the chair of the DNC, but a lot of people know him because he ran against Lindsey Graham, right? About 2 years ago, which I knew he had no chance of beating Lindsey Graham. Both of them in South Carolina, obviously. I still don't know why people in South Carolina continue to vote for Lindsey Graham. He hasn't done anything for people there either. But I also knew that Jamie Harrison had no chance to beat him because I've lived there and I know how people think and how people act. So she's very frustrated, not just with Joe Biden, but with the Democratic Party in particular. And this leads to this particular question. Joe Biden has been losing support amongst Black voters. Black voters have been leaving the Democratic Party. In particular, Black men have been leaving the Democratic Party. Is 2024 the time where Black Americans significantly say, we are not going to cave to the Democratic Party and we're walking the fuck away? And what will that mean for Joe Biden and for the Democratic Party? So I want to go ahead and bring up this clip here. Chairman of the DNC getting that work. So let's bring up the first video because there's two here. Whoop. But it's not just about lineage-based reparation. There we go. If you can boost the volume on this a little bit, Eric, because she's going to complain about how Black people have been voting for the Democratic Party for over 30 years and nothing has improved. We have other problems. You're asking us for our vote. We need an anti-Black crime bill. We have just witnessed in Jacksonville. Thank you.
Illegal, but only offer, only talk to Black people about voting. And that's what you're doing up in here today, pandering for voting. I seriously hope illegal, but only offer, only talk to Black people about voting. And that's what you're doing up in here today, pandering for. But it's not just about lineage-based reparations. We have other problems. You're asking us for our vote. We need an anti-Black crime bill. We have just witnessed in Jacksonville a white supremacist shoot down 3 people for the sake, just simply because they were Black. Subsequent to that, there was another thwarted attempt at a church, right, that was thankfully thwarted, where they wanted to kill Black people in a church. This is literally our life and our world. Within the past 30 days, then up in the Cape, up in Massachusetts, we got young white supremacists sitting up there trying to drown a teenage Black boy in a pond and yelling George Floyd. So we have a real problem. The DNC needs to give us an anti-Black criminal bill. It's extremely serious. Let's reel it back. Let's take it back to Buffalo. Everybody's being shot in Buffalo. No, hold on.
Let's pause here for just a second. First of all, everything that she's saying is absolutely correct. And the point that she is making is that the Democratic Party, this is under Joe Biden now. We're not talking about under Donald Trump. We're talking about right now under Joe Biden. When Joe Biden came into office, he rushed quickly to pass the anti-hate Asian crime bill. They move quickly for other groups. But when it comes to Black Americans, we're always the ones that are either left out or we're pushed at the bottom, or like Joe Biden told that group of civil rights leaders, now is not the time. So she is 100% correct. She has a valid point. So her question is, how long is this supposed to go on? Why do we continue to support you? And people may wonder, why is she approaching Jamie Harrison? He's the chair of the DNC. Perfect opportunity. Let me let her continue here. I'll just go back just a little bit. Okay.
Everybody's being shot in Buffalo. No, hold on. In Buffalo, we died. We died in Buffalo, but we got an anti-Semitism bill. What is the DNC doing about anti-Blackness in this country? What are you doing about it?
Good question.
No, I didn't say it there. What are we doing?
She talked about the shooting that happened in Buffalo, And she said Black people were killed in Buffalo. It was a hate crime, but the response was to issue an anti-Semitism bill. So the point again that she's making is that when it comes to the plight of Black Americans in this country, it doesn't matter if the president's Republican or Democrat, we are still left out. What has Joe Biden done? And this is part of the reason why, like I said before, he is losing the support of African Americans in this country. Let me let her continue.
We need to do something about lineage-based reparations. If we need to do something about anti-Black crime, you are the DNC. You have the power of the DNC. We don't see it. Joe Biden said that he had our back, but what we're seeing is that he's stabbing us in the back. Thank you. Respectfully.
Respectfully disagree with you too.
I respect you. Well, you need to respectfully go to the drawing board and look at the current events. Look at what's going down in the national media. We're getting killed.
Well, and listen, man,
they're drowning.
I know that.
The case 2 weeks ago, you want to drown a teenager in a white supremacist, a young one too. They're being breeded. You want to get them drowned for everybody's trying to act like anti-Blackness doesn't exist. And on top of that, right here on this university, the Freedmen Center, we're talking about the Freedmen. We're talking about the descendants of U.S. chattel slavery, known as Freedmen and the Negro. When is the DNC going to do something for the Negro? We need our...
Very good points. Very good points.
To all of these students up in here, you're sitting on your hands, literally, and then you're going to be disrespectful and walk off the stage. But you won our vote. Sir, we've been voting for 60 fucking years, and we haven't gotten a damn thing from you.
So I don't know if you guys saw what happened there, but there's Jamie Harrison right there. So when he was pressed with this question, he decided to walk off the stage because at the end of the day, yes, Jamie Harrison is one of those people that you refer to as black faces in high places. Yes, he's Black. He's chair of the DNC. He can look at you and say, look, I'm fighting for you. I'm one of you, but he's not. The thing is, Jimmy Harrison is the chair of the DNC because they know he will follow the status quo. They know he's not really going to do. You think they would let someone be chair of the DNC that's actually going to fight for Black people? No. That's why they put him in there. Him, Clarence Thomas, both of them. And again, South Carolina, I know him and Clarence Thomas, they in the same boat. That's why they promote those people. And you don't get there just by doing a good job. So he's walking off the stage. He can't take it.
Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. We haven't got anything. Sir, what? No, because I'm mad as hell, sir. 60 years we've been voting. What have we got other than being at the bottom class? And this clown here gonna sit up here and give us this Baptist preacher antic show, and we buy and see. But I hope you're not buying into that bullshit. I really hope you're not buying into it, because that is fucking disgusting and disrespectful. To come up here and charge you guys for coming in here to see this shit show, and then not only that, you guys being charged again off your tuition. Do you know that? I'm pretty sure you don't. So, with that being said, I seriously hope that you guys don't go to the poll and vote for no more of these fuckers that sit in office ain't doing a damn thing for us.
I told you guys. It's what I've been telling you. I say the same thing. People are like, that's stupid. That's foolish. Then the Republicans are going to win. Democratic Party isn't doing anything for you. Now, also notice there weren't many people in that room. So I guess not that many people were excited about listening to Jamie Harrison. But Joe Biden was actually pressed about this question. Why should Black voters choose him? This was in the ABC town hall. I want to remind you what he said. And he starts offline.
From Cedric Humphrey. He's a student from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, progressive Democrat.
Don't jump, Cedric. You look like you're way up there.
I'll be okay. Thank you, George. And good evening, former Vice President Biden. Many people believe that the true swing demographic in this election will be Black voters under the age of 30. Not because they'll be voting for Trump, but because they won't vote at all. I myself have had this exact same conflict. So my question for you then is, besides you ain't black, what do you have to say to young black voters who see voting for you as further participation in a system that continually fails to protect them?
Again, I want to point out these people are picked or handpicked from the audience. Their questions have already been selected. They already know they're going to be called on. So just FYI, listen to what Joe Biden says.
Well, I say, first of all, as my buddy John Lewis said, it's a sacred opportunity and right to vote. You can make a difference. If young black women and men vote, you can determine the outcome of this election. Not a joke. You can do.
What sense does that make, what he just said there? If young black women and men come out to vote, you can determine the result of this election. Well, duh, that's because the Democratic Party cannot win without the black vote. Why are you telling this young man this? Why are you telling him so? He already know this. What kind of response is that? It gets worse. Listen to this.
Do that. And the next question is, am I worthy of your vote? Can I earn your vote? And the answer is, there's two things I think that I care, and I've demonstrated I care about my whole career. One is, in addition to dealing with a criminal justice system to make it fair and make it more decent, we have to be able to put black Americans in a position to be able to gain wealth.
The first example that Joe Biden chooses to mention is the criminal justice system in his record. Horrible example. He leads into that with, we have to make it so that black people can generate more wealth. I don't think bragging about your record in reference to criminal justice is going to make black people want to come out and support you, considering the fact that you co-wrote the crime bills, which targeted black men in this country. What a mess.
Generate wealth. And so you look at what that entails. It entails everything from early education. That's why I'm supporting making sure that we in Title I schools, as you know, schools with the least tax base to be able to support their schools. I increased the funding for them from 15 to $45 billion. That allows every teacher in that school to make up to $60,000. And the problem now is they're leaving the schools. They're not there. We're short about 1.5 million teachers, 1.25 million.
Last time I checked, all these teachers are not making $60,000 a year. I know teachers making $35,000 a year, some less than that. It just...
quarter teachers. Number two, every 3 and 4 and 5-year-old will go to school, not daycare, school. And what all the great universities, including the one you've go to or went to, in fact, talks about in the last 8 years, what's happened. What happens when you let them go to school, they make up rapidly whatever shortcoming they had in terms of their education prior to that. They have not heard as many words spoken, et cetera, et cetera. What happens is that the studies show that 58% will increase by 58% their chance of going all through 12 years of school and going through successfully. We'll also provide for the ability to bring in social workers and school psychologists. We have one school psychologist in America now for every 1,507 kids. It should.
These are individual components of a failed system. Notice there's no systemic changes. He's talking about the school districts. Obviously, this kid, they say he's a college student. Okay, so none of this, what he's saying, means anything to this kid. None of it. He's not thinking about K through 12 right now. None of it. So the thing is that I really want to point out that I think is important is that when he talks about giving funding to the Title I schools, we talk about funding for schools in this country. We cannot talk about this, particularly K through 12, without addressing the fact that schools that are in lower income areas receive less funding. They're underfunded. They're under-resourced because those schools are funded based on property taxes. Now, what is the correct response? If you are president or if you're running for president, how do you fix that? You take that ability to have property taxes fund these schools and you let the federal government fund those schools. That way, all the schools get equal funding. and equal resources. Now, before you shout back at me and say, no, that would be a disaster, I want to let you know the federal government already does that. They do it with the DOD schools. I went to a DOD school, so I know the federal government paid for it. Do you think when I was in band, I had to pay for my instrument? No, they paid for it. It was free. When I was on the basketball team, I didn't have to pay for my uniform. I didn't have to pay for any of those things because the federal government paid for the schools, the DOD schools, which are the schools that the military kids go to. So don't tell me the federal government can't do it. If they can do that for those of us that had parents that were in the military, they can do it for every kid in this country. You shouldn't have to be, your parents shouldn't have to be a part of the military industrial complex for you to get that same type of opportunity.
Be 1 to 500, not just in schools that are poor, but in all schools. Because we learned that, for example, drug abuse doesn't cause mental illness. Mental illness causes drug abuse, the failure to get hold of people and deal with their anxieties. In addition to that, I provide for $70 billion for HBCUs for them to be able to have the wherewithal to do what other universities can do because they don't have the kind of foundational support they need. And so that would allow them, for example, like we did in our administration, the president allowed me to.
But again, we're going to stop it here. But again, not addressing the systemic issue. And also, he promised to cancel student debt for those that went to HBCUs who were earning under $125,000 a year. And that did not happen. You know, he just told you, he said these schools are under-resourced. They're receiving less. Why? Why are they that way? Why are they receiving less funding? Why are they getting less resources? You have to get to the root of the problem. So when we talk about Black people walking away from the Democratic Party, it's not just because of crazy ass Joe Biden. It's because of decades of experience voting for the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party not producing tangible results. Let's talk about the wealth gap. I got 3 shorts I want to play here. Part 1, 2, and 3 about the wealth gap. The Democratic Party is connected to all of it. And you guys need to see this. This young woman really hit the nail on the head. Listen to this.
Why are Black folks in the U.S. so much poorer on average than the rest of the country? In very simple terms, it's because of the racial wealth gap. The disparities in wealth accumulation between the rich and the poor in the U.S. become even more extreme when you take race into account. The net worth of a typical white family in the U.S. is nearly 10 times what the net worth of a typical Black family is in the U.S.
And remember, I told you that study in reference to Boston, that study was that the net worth for white families in Boston is roughly 250K. And for Black families is $8. Net worth is what you own minus what you owe. Problem is, you have a lot of people that they may own something, even if you just own your car, right? But you owe a lot of money. Student loan debt, medical debt, credit card debt. The list goes on. Or you owe a lot and you don't own anything. And one of the problems you run into, particularly in Boston, is that, first of all, most people in Boston can't afford to buy a house in Boston. Okay, that's just keeping it real. But even when you go to the suburbs outside of Boston, again, most Black families cannot afford to purchase homes in those suburban areas that surround Boston. So again, what is one of the biggest things in reference to wealth? Home ownership. That's important.
Why is that? From the very founding of this country, the systems of government, corporate enterprise, and societal structures were designed to lock Black people out of any opportunities to accumulate wealth or pursue education as other groups did. We've only begun to acknowledge and address these disparities in the last 50 years or so, and we've still got a long way to go to right the wrongs of the past. After 240 years of slavery, where it was illegal for Black people to be educated, you had another 60 years of legal segregation with Jim Crow laws, which I talked about in an earlier series. And it wasn't that long ago. Both my parents were born into the Jim Crow era. In the next video, I'm going to talk about banking and housing discrimination, which greatly affects generational wealth. Why are Black folks...
What she just said there at the end about integration and segregation, What's incredibly important to note, guys, I am the first person in my family to go to an integrated school. Let that sink in. My parents went to segregated schools. My grandparents went to segregated schools. My great-grandparents, et cetera, et cetera. My generation and all of my friends, all of us in the millennial group, just kind of bobbing and weaving, all of our parents went to segregated schools. We were the first ones to go to integrated school. So let that sink in. So what that goes to show you is that, again, when we talk about the growth that this country has had, remember, these changes weren't that long ago. Civil rights movement was not that long ago. So these are things that we have to keep in mind. I think I just scrolled past here we go. Now let's go to part 2, because she's going to talk about the housing issue. Oh, plays up there. What is
I'm
this?
sitting in the bar.
Why haven't black folks in the U.S. been able to accumulate wealth at the rate that other groups have? Through much of the 20th century, black folks who attempted to purchase a home were systematically denied bank loans through a practice called redlining. Redlining started in the 1930s in the U.S. Bank lenders would color code neighborhoods according to their perceived risk. Poorer areas that were predominantly black or Latino were colored red, meaning banks would not lend to anyone in those neighborhoods. The federal government's Homeowners Loan Corporation created these maps along with real estate agents and banks. This practice went on until 1968, until it was technically outlawed by the Fair Housing Act. The Community Reinvestment Act in 1977 helped too, but there are many indications that housing discrimination is alive and well today. It's estimated that many black families have lost out on $212,000 in increased property values over the last 40 years because their home is in a formerly redlined area. In part 3, I'll talk about how federal housing segregation policies legally prevented black people from buying homes in the suburbs. Why haven't black...
Okay, that part right there is very important. Again, keep in mind, Democratic Party all through the way. So when people talk about FDR's New Deal, they're like, we need an FDR, Democrat. People don't tell you the full story about the New Deal and FDR. And people don't tell you that black families were left out of a lot of those policies when you talk about the New Deal. A lot of people aren't telling you that, especially when it comes to the redlining. Let's continue. This is part 3.
Why is the inner city filled with so many black people as white folks flock to the suburbs? Generational wealth building is directly tied to home ownership. For decades, black people were largely shut out of that system. In the 1930s, under Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, the newly created Federal Housing Authority gave money to builders who mass-produced homes in the suburbs. The federal government stipulated that none of those homes could be sold to black buyers. This was federal policy. So for white folks, you had subsidized housing in the suburbs. For black folks, you had subsidized housing projects in the inner city. Home ownership in white families increased exponentially after World War II through the GI Bill. Many black vets were systematically shut out of that process too. You can see how this sets up a feedback loop. If your parents and grandparents weren't able to accumulate any wealth through home ownership, not only do they have nothing to pass down to you, but you're more likely to deplete your resources by taking care of them in their old age. And you're less likely to have any accumulated wealth to pass down to your children. In 2021, only 44% of black families are homeowners versus 73% of white families. Why is the inner city filled with so many black people?
So think about that, people. And all these years, so let's think about it. We went away from the revolutionary leaders, and the black community said the best thing to do is to vote for the Democratic Party. Now, some of that started in the black church. I'm just going to keep it real, because a lot of these politicians, they have connections within the black church. They have connections within the fraternity, the Greek life, right? So that's where a lot of this comes from. And the thing is like when we went away from that revolutionary way of thinking and following along with these politicians and voting for politicians in the Democratic Party, thinking that they were going to actually implement some type of change, that has been happening for decades and nothing has improved. The ghettos are still ghettos, and the ghettos that are no longer ghettos are gentrified neighborhoods. So the poverty issue, particularly in the black community in this country, it's worse. And what people have to understand, I said before, when you look at the economy, when you look at black wealth, It was better for Black people. This is back in under Reconstruction. It was better for Black people then than it is today. These are big problems. And what we have seen over time is that the Democratic Party would always come out and say, vote for us or else you're going to get the scary Republicans and you're going to lose all your rights and your freedoms. But what they don't say is that, you know, don't vote for us because we may not take away all your rights and your freedoms, but we're also going to keep you at the bottom where you are. And we're not going to help you economically. In fact, we're going to help every other group but you. They work hand in hand. They work together. Democrat, Republican, they both have corporate interest. They don't have our interest. So what the woman said, the woman who spoke up to Jamie Harrison, where's that? She was spot on. Jamie Harrison ran away because he is a tool of the establishment and he protects the status quo. Jamie Harrison is not trying to answer any real, hard, significant questions. Jamie Harrison is going to run the first chance that he gets because he's not really trying to help anybody in his community. He's just there as a Black face to make you think you have somebody there to help you when you actually don't. Now, unfortunately, what's been happening is that some African Americans that are leaving the Democratic Party are going to the Republican Party. That's not the answer either. Both parties are corporate. They're both controlled by Wall Street and the military industrial complex. And so that what we have to come to realize, look, Claudia was just on here. What we was just talking about Goldman Sachs. What we have to realize is we have to break away from the corporate interest. And one of the ways that you do that is through worker cooperatives. Even unions is not going to be the final stop, bud. Because union managers turn on union members. It's through worker cooperatives, grassroots movements, mutual aid, and organizing within your community. That's how you're going to shift the tide. That's how you're going to make changes that you'll actually see. But Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, you know, I told you guys a long time ago, walk away from this system. Walk away from it. You don't owe them anything. These people, these politicians, they only come around when they want your vote. They come around every time they're trying to get reelected, and then you never see these people again. That's all they want. Your vote. And every time you reelect them, you're just enriching them more. The longer they're there, particularly the congressmen and the senators, the longer they're there, the more chances they have of getting a book deal. Their pension will increase. And these people will have multiple homes and you're still living in a one-bedroom apartment that you're sharing with two other people. That's not right. Think about it. Think about it, folks.